While jump scares and terrifying monster designs are important to any great horror game, having an interesting protagonist to carry on a franchise is vital when creating a horror story enriched with lore. Sure, the protagonist doesn't need to return for multiple games in the series, but the impact that they leave behind and the mark that they make on the franchise is never forgotten, and it keeps gamers coming back to their favorite horror games over and over again. So today we're looking at the top 10 best protagonists in horror games. For the record, we'll only be featuring one protagonist per franchise for this list to keep things interesting. Also, keep in mind that this list is based on my own personal preferences, and I'm like 99.9% sure a lot of you guys are going to disagree with some of my choices. However, I strongly recommend dropping your favorite horror game protagonist in the comments down below. Finally, while I try to avoid spoilers when I can, some characters require me to dive deep into spoilers, so you might want to use the timestamps below to skip past horror games you don't want to hear spoilers on, just in case. Before we get started though, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel for more survival horror content. Also hit that like button if you enjoyed today's topic. Anyway, my name is Ruben with Nursepace Games, and this is my top 10 best protagonists in a horror game. Let's get it. Number 10, Regina, Dino Crisis. Of course, someone that is a time-traveling badass lady with fiery red hair that kicks dinosaur ass was bound to make my list for best protagonists in a horror game. While Regina may not be the most complex or interesting character on today's list, she is easily one of the coolest characters. She's pretty much Jill Valentine from Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, only better and more badass and more exciting. And this is coming from someone that loves Jill Valentine in RE3 OG, by the way. On multiple occasions between two games, Regina proves that she's intelligent, strategic, resourceful, reliable, and calm given the circumstances that she finds herself in. I mean, the girl is literally being attacked by dinosaurs left and right, and she handles it like a pro. I think the only reason why I couldn't move her higher up on today's list is mostly because she lacks character development throughout her time in both games, and that's something that I like in my characters. You know, flawed and imperfect. But Regina, she is the opposite of that, and while that may keep her from moving higher up on today's list, it also makes her unique and helps her stand out enough to grab a bottom spot on today's list. Number 9, Isaac Clarke, Dead Space. As I said earlier, I love it when my horror game protagonists are flawed yet likable and still somehow relatable. In the case of Isaac Clarke, he's not the perfect person. In fact, he makes multiple mistakes within the Dead Space trilogy, some of which cause the death of people around him. Despite that though, Isaac does his best to fight against the threats that surround him. Whether he's fighting against hallucinations created from the markers, undead alien creatures, or cult members obsessed with the Church of Unitology, Isaac still somehow finds ways to just come out on top and redeem himself from previous mistakes. Something that makes Isaac different from a lot of traditional horror game protagonists is the fact that he's not a soldier, he's not a cop, he's a mechanic that just finds himself in tough situations and has to adapt to them. Still, this unique trait allows Isaac to find solutions to problems that no one else could have solved or repaired if they were in his shoes. Number 8, Alan Wake, Alan Wake. Speaking of types of characters that aren't necessarily used as horror game protagonists, Alan Wake is a writer whose talent is turned against him when he arrives in Bright Falls to work on his new story. What starts off as a trip away from the public turns into a nightmare written by Alan Wake himself as he watches his newest story come to life right before his very eyes. When it comes to Cauldron Lake in Bright Falls, it's a place that turns works of art into reality, and it's a place infested with a dark entity. This dark force wants nothing more but to come into our reality and fill the world with darkness, and it's up to Alan Wake to keep the dark forces at bay by finding loopholes in his own story. This concept kind of applies to both games, although in different ways. Alan Wake is a very interesting character as we get to see his mind laid bare in front of us as we see what keeps him up at night, what he thinks about, what he fears, and what he wants to protect. His stories are constantly turning against him throughout his journey in both games, and watching him realize what he needs to do at every single crossroad is one of the most intriguing experiences to watch play out. Something else that I think adds a unique flair to Alan Wake is the fact that we always hear what he's thinking. Sure, this is something that we've experienced in other horror games, especially psychological horror games, but not to the extent that we see it play out between both Alan Wake games. Because of us being able to dive deep into what Alan is thinking constantly at every turn, both Alan Wake 1 and 2 allows us to connect with his character more than most characters in horror games. Number 7, Junpei, Zero Escape series. Okay, so a lot of this video I am trying my best to avoid spoilers, or at least in-game spoilers. However, I can't really talk about Junpei without spoiling some major reveals in the Zero Escape series, so yeah, keep that in mind. Anyway, Junpei is one of two characters I think that has appeared in all three games of the trilogy. He's the main protagonist in the first game, returns in a very distant future as an old man named Tomoji in the second game, and then appears as one of the characters in the third game, which takes place in between the first two games. Well, sort of. Time travel and whatnot kind of makes this all kind of confusing, honestly. Anyway, Junpei is a character that I have always really enjoyed because we get to see different personalities from him. And while that might not make sense on paper, when you think about how his life plays out, it honestly makes total sense why we see his personality change over time. In the first game, he's an innocent young man who is reunited with his childhood friend. In the second game, he's an old man that has experienced years and years of heartbreak when the woman he loves, Akane, has kind of pushed him away and become obsessed with changing the past. And in the final game, we see a variation of him that is sort of in the middle. He still loves and cares for Akane, and he clearly hasn't experienced all of the heartbreak that he had in the older version of himself, but he's still extremely frustrated with everything that he's been through, that he's been put through in pursuit of reuniting with Akane. He's a character that has a lot more depth than most horror game protagonists, and while he might not be viewed as the main protagonist of the second and even the third game, he still has a vital part in the main story of each game of this fantastic franchise. Number 6, Sebastian, the Evil Within. There's two people on this list that might very well be the unluckiest people ever. Sebastian from the Evil Within series is one of those people. Even before the start of the first game, Sebastian thought he lost his daughter Lily in a fire, and he and his wife grew apart because of that tragic moment in their lives. Because of that, Sebastian buried himself in two things: alcohol and his work. Despite that though, we see Sebastian have traits that makes him one of the more likable characters in a horror game. He's a flawed individual, yeah sure, but he's still the heroic type that does whatever he can to save his friends. Even after waking up inside of a simulated reality made up of nightmares, Sebastian still pushes through and defies all odds to try and save his friends Kidman and Joseph. Then we see him do this again in the second game. He once again enters them when he learns that his daughter is still alive and is trapped in this world. As most fathers would, Sebastian doesn't hesitate and he jumps straight back into the nightmare to fight more psychopaths with insane abilities in order to save Lily, which he does eventually do. But it comes at yet another cost because, as I stated earlier, Sebastian is one unlucky dude. He can't walk away unscathed, and we see him get one thing back, but at the cost of something else important to him. Number 5, Clementine, the Walking Dead Telltale series. The Walking Dead Telltale series may very well be the best story in terms of horror games. It's a tragic story that introduces you to multiple characters, gets you to fall in love with them, and then puts you in situations in which your choices could lead to their survival or their death. One constant in the entire series though is Clementine. We're first introduced to her in the first season of the series as an innocent young girl who the main protagonist, Lee, raises in a post-apocalyptic world. Lee trains her in everything that she needs to know in order to survive in this world, and it's because of the things that she learns from him that she's able to face every single challenge that awaits her in her future. Our first look at Clementine as the main protagonist though is the second season, in which we see her living on her own, finding old and new friends, and helping lead a community of her own despite her young age. Clementine is someone that is forced to grow old fast because of the reality of her situation, and the thing that makes her one of the more interesting protagonists in a horror game is the fact that on paper, she shouldn't have been able to survive the things that she does. Hell, a lot of people have been in similar situations as her throughout the franchise and died more times than not. Yet, for whatever reason, Clementine is a character that somehow always overcomes the odds, and depending on the actions of the player, she's someone that could be a ruthless badass or a reliable ally and friend. While her personality changes a bit from season to season and from choice to choice, there's traits about her that usually stick with her, and the things that do change about her you totally get considering what she goes through. She's honestly one of the most likable characters in all of horror games in my opinion, and I personally believe that she's not talked about enough when people are mentioning their favorite protagonists in horror games. Number 4, Aya Brea, Parasite Eve. Cops in horror games kind of go hand in hand, to be honest. We see it all the time. Leon, Sybil, Sebastian, Sarah Breaker. The list goes on. Cops with the ability to shoot fire from their hands and heal themselves like they were a mage straight out of a Final Fantasy game, on the other hand, is a little more rare. That's Aya Brea for you. As with most cops in survival horror games, Aya Brea is a true badass that handles the terrifying monsters that she comes across like a damn pro. She's not afraid of anything thrown her way, and she's not afraid to put herself in the line of fire to take down a threat in order to save the world. Of course, some of her confidence might come from the fact that the same thing that basically creates the monsters and enemies that she fights against is essentially the same thing that gives her magic-like abilities to fight against these creatures. By the way, this is starting to sound more like a Final Fantasy game the more I talk about it. It's because the game was created by Square Enix or Squaresoft at the time. You know, creators of the Final Fantasy franchise. Actually, the first Parasite Eve game was designed to be a cross between survival horror and RPG, which is why the gameplay feels like your typical turn-based JRPG. Regardless, Ray is easily one of my favorite horror game protagonists despite her not having any voice lines in the first two games. Her past and her connection to the main antagonist of the first game, Eve, and the fact that she takes on the role of a mother figure to a clone of herself in the second game named Eve. I know, kinda confusing. But yeah, she's just someone that has always had a cold exterior while also connecting with everybody around her with her own unique and witty personality and charm, and that's one of the things that I really liked about her. Number 3, Joel Miller, The Last of Us. If we're looking strictly at the first Last of Us game, both Joel and Ellie make a strong case for this list, and honestly speaking, I go back and forth about which one I personally like a little better. Hell, ever so often it changes for me, so if there ever was an entry that I would feature two characters in the same spot, it would be Joel and Ellie. However, at this exact moment, I'll give the edge to Joel right now. I think the reason why I find Joel to be my favorite of the two, and even in my top 3 favorite horror game protagonists of all time, comes down to the fact that he's a flawed individual that isn't exactly a good person, yet I still somehow find myself relating to him and agreeing with a lot of the bad things that he does do given the situation. Yikes, does that make me a bad person? Anyways, we're diving heavy into spoilers right now, but there's a lot of decisions that Joel makes throughout the game after the death of his daughter at the start of this legendary story that I honestly kind of understand and kind of respect him for. From not allowing himself to get too attached to anybody, to not trusting someone in the street who is asking for help, to committing mass genocide to save someone that is like a daughter to him, are all the things that don't necessarily scream good deed, but at the same time you understand why he does it. You understand how Joe feels and you connect with him no matter how many good or bad things he does throughout the story. And for a protagonist that has that big of an impact on you, to connect with you on that deep of a level that even when he's doing something morally wrong, you still find yourself on his side of it, yeah, that's not easy to accomplish, and for that reason, Joe is without a doubt one of the best protagonists in all of horror games. Again, a lot of the same things could be said about Ellie in the first game, and some people would agree that they still feel that way about her in the second game, but at this very moment, I give the slight edge to my boy, Joel. Number 2, Heather Mason, Silent Hill 3. Anyway, while The Last of Us entry is a battle between Joel and Ellie, Silent Hill really is a battle between 3 characters for me to represent the series. Harry Mason from Silent Hill, James Sunderland of Silent Hill 2, and Heather Mason of Silent Hill 3. Again, this really depends on my mood at that exact moment, but ultimately Heather Mason is the one that sticks out to me as the most interesting to watch in my opinion. While Harry Mason's undying loyalty to his daughter is heartwarming, and the dark and complex story of James Sunderland kept me intrigued from start to finish, Heather as a protagonist just had a stronger connection with me when playing through the game. I think the thing that interests me the most about Heather compared to most Silent Hill protagonists is the fact that she felt different. Looking at the series as a whole, most main characters share a similar vibe as each other. They all feel sad, depressed, lost, scared, and timid. And yeah, that totally makes sense given their situation. But Heather on the other hand came off as confident, strong, calm, and determined. I mean, unlike most characters, Heather didn't wake up in Silent Hill after a crash or was pulled there because of their personal trauma. She came there for revenge against the people responsible for taking the life of someone special to her. And she came in angry, ready to burn the entire town down. We don't really see that much in the series when it comes to protagonists. Sure, at times Heather might come off as a moody teenager, but in reality, she was just filled with hatred and anger, which is kind of the point, as that's what the cult wanted Heather to feel, as those emotions fed the god inside of Heather. All in all, I personally feel like Heather is the most badass protagonist of the series, and she's also someone that I feel like pushes herself the most to achieve what she sets out to do. Number 1, Chris Redfield, Resident Evil. Considering the fact that my favorite video game franchise of all time is Resident Evil, it really shouldn't be too shocking to find a character from that series claiming the number 1 spot. However, what's a little more surprising is probably my pick, Chris Redfield, unless you guys have been watching the channel for a while now. Listen, I love most of the main characters of the franchise. The fan favorite, Leon Kennedy, is a badass. Jill Valentine is easily one of the coolest characters of the franchise, and I even have a soft spot for Rebecca Chambers of all people. But ever since I played Resident Evil Code Veronica, Chris Redfield has and probably always will be my favorite horror game character of all time. I've just really loved Chris's journey throughout the franchise, the lows and the highs. His journey has been the most fun to watch, and while I haven't agreed with all the decisions that Capcom made for his character, I've always appreciated the risks that they took with him. He started out as your typical Boy Scout cop, as a STARS Alpha member, and as Wesker himself stated, his best and most talented soldier soldier. However, after losing people close to him once and being betrayed by Wesker, Chris learned from the situation and devoted his life to bringing down the people responsible for it, Umbrella. This led to Chris to flying all around the world looking for the evidence that he needed to bring Umbrella down once and for all. In Code Veronica, we see how strong Chris's relationship is with his sister, Claire Redfield. He travels to Rockford Island and then to the Antarctic base in search of his sister. In the process, he battles Wesker, Alexia, and other BOWs as he once again defies all odds and survives. From here, we see Chris continue to develop as a character and as someone that has devoted his entire life to fighting BOWs. He joins the BSAA with Jill, his partner, and eventually he believes he loses her to Wesker. In Resident Evil 5, Chris finally reunites with Jill while also finally defeating and taking down Wesker once and for all. It's at this point where we see the war in BOWs finally take a toll on Chris as he's constantly losing people he cares about in the war. Losing one team to the C-Virus in RE6 puts Chris at his lowest of lows, but he overcomes it thanks to Pierce, who he also loses. Yeah, it's probably around this time where we start to notice Chris is clearly cursed when it comes to his friends, as a lot of people he's close to dies. In RE7, in the Not a Hero DLC, he loses his entire squad as well, and in Resident Evil Village, he loses Ethan and takes up the role of raising Ethan's daughter to be strong. Chris is someone that has gone through hell and back, and he's someone that clearly hasn't always been the hero that we normally see in horror games. However, all of this just makes him that much more enjoyable to watch, and every time he's in a Resident Evil game, I'm always curious as to what road he'll take next and where it will lead. But that does it for this episode of Nerd Space Games. Hit up the comments and let me know what you think of my list. Is Chris Redfield your favorite horror game protagonist? Is it a different Resident Evil character like Leon or Jill? Or is it some other horror game character altogether that might not have made my list? Let me know your thoughts down below. But thanks for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerd Space Games. Take care.